Hey Guru Nation, welcome back to another episode. I'm here back with a return. Senior Director, Mount Sinai Health System, Michelle Cohen. Michelle and I have been Michelle's been on the show so many times. We've been interacting since like 2018, 2017. I know Michelle was like really early adopter of using eSource, eReg. She's always looking for latest tech tools to increase efficiency at the site. I actually visited her site at Mount Sinai there in Manhattan. It's an interesting setup. Um, I was amazed. Like you guys have, and I don't know how many staff you have now, but you had like this central place where all the coordinators would work, with cubicles, but then you'd have all these exam rooms surrounding it. And at the time, uh, to me, that was like strange because I'm used to dealing with smaller sites. But now that we're integrated in a bigger medical practice, we almost have the similar setup without the cubicles. We just have our own room, but then we have all these exam rooms all around us. So we kind of have like the model you have, and we're running out of space just like you were back then. I remember lab kits stacked to the ceiling. You're in Manhattan, real estate's not, it doesn't come easy. Uh, and we're kind of in the same boat. So how's everything?
Hi, thanks for having me back. Things are good. I joke around that we're in our senior year of COVID, so things have kind of calmed down and stabilized per se. I'm no longer running COVID studies, and it's nice back to doing real research and being able to address, all the various disease states that we do research on and have a full team that's functioning and back on site.
Back on site. So it took you guys this long to actually get back on site?
We've actually you know, I right before COVID hit, I was already modeling what does it mean to be hybrid and how can we make that functional for our teams and which teams that could actually apply to. Our regulatory team and our finance team and even our clinical operations teams, they have the ability to really be in a remote work situation and come to campus every now and then, or once a week, with some sort of cadence or frequency once staff have really been trained and understand their roles and responsibilities and are accountable. And
Hmm.
then, our coordinators were out of space in many ways. So we're trying to figure out, models that work for coordinators, to be, they have the advantage of being like in a remote work situation once or twice a month, but, on a rotating basis with desks and
Mm.
schedules to accommodate. But really, patients are on site and recruitment and interaction with clinicians are on site, and we really need staff on site to optimize our recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, space is the issue. Like even for me too, I'm here in Yuma, Arizona, and it's definitely not Manhattan in terms of real estate, but we are integrated in a private practice, and I actually can't hire another coordinator because of space. Like the PI told us in about a year we'll have another site where he's expanding it, so we'll be able to have like two sites. But like sometimes just you're limited not by the study opportunities or even by budget, it's just by space.
Resource allocation. It's
Hmm.
about it is about space, it is about staff, and it is about equipment.
And how do you navigate? So how many coordinators or how many employees report to you at the present moment?
46.
46. Wow. Yeah, there's definitely not enough space for all of them to be there. And you're in that Manhattan place I visited, right?
Yeah, that's one of the locations. I also
Mhm.
have staff at 102nd Street, at another building, and further uptown on
Uptown.
106th Street and on 100th Street, and every nook and cranny we could get ourselves into. And I'm currently working with department leadership on potentially expanding to our other campuses to be able to do a hub and spoke model for research across the
Mm.
differences.
Would that require, do you think that would require a PI at each of those locations, or you can do a central PI and manage the studies that way?
That's a good question. I think it's gonna be both. I think we'll have PIs that are, primarily in those locations. I think we're gonna have some PIs that wind up going over there because we'll run some sort of office hours so they could, have some quiet time in between seeing patients. And I think we may also engage in maybe some mid-level providers, some APPs or nurse practitioners to see the patient visits.
Yeah, those mid-level providers definitely come in handy when you're expanding and growing. One of my business partner is a nurse practitioner, and he actually does a lot of the heavy lifting from a clinician standpoint when it comes to overseeing the studies and the patients. Um, so yeah, that like I guess you needed tech. It makes sense why you're an early adopter of tech systems. I mean, that's the only way to manage the staff you have, the way I see it.
Yeah, I like to learn new systems and learn new things and to kind of keep a growing edge on my knowledge and operations and what we can do to improve, our working opportunities. Um, we moved to Teams exclusively for some documents, as kind of like a playground situation and standardizing that in terms of training documents for staff and, for each one of the studies to standardize how we are storing items. And then we also have an e-regulatory platform. We're, partnered with Florence Healthcare and we've been using eReg, and that really saved us over the pandemic. And,
Mhm.
please report that also um, very successful recent FDA audit with utilizing that platform. And it was very, very informative and enlightening to see how advantageous that is, that we don't no longer would have like 15 regulatory binders when you're walking into an audit.
So
Um,
how did that work? I mean, you want to share a little bit about that?
sure. First of all, the FDA auditor couldn't reach us. So basically, he came unannounced. He had been trying to reach us for about a week. We were prepared, in the sense that we were identified by the sponsor in thinking that we would be audited as being a highest enroller for a trial. And we had pre-prepared all of the studies. There were 3 studies in this program that we were audited for, and we basically set up a role inside our e-binder system for the auditor. We turned it on at every morning when he arrived at the site and turned it off at the end of the day every day. This auditor was not interested in having one iota of paper, didn't want to, so like out came my copy stamp when like he arrived. And then he was like, I would like everything on a flash drive. So that was a,
Wow.
and so, we had to make sure we had an encrypted flash drive and put everything on there. And then we used we set up a war room and set up a scribe and set up minutes for every single day, and made a folder of every day of whatever documents that he was asking to collect, and then had a debrief at the end of every day with the sponsor to let them know how progress was going.
So why did you have to give him flash drives if you guys are on eSource and eReg? What, he did
He
not accept
copied.
access?
No, he asked for hard copies of DOA, training logs, monitoring letters. He wanted certain documents for each one of the studies, which was interesting to me.
Are you guys on electronic DOA? Like everything's signed digitally, or do you still have the
Yes, yep, everything's electronic, but he did not want anything copied. He wanted everything in an electronic format.
That's strange. Do you have to comply? I'm just curious. Like,
That's a great question. I would say never want to not comply with an
yeah,
audit and their
it
request.
seems strange because if I'm putting myself in your shoes, if he came to our site and asked for that, I would say, well, We have SOPs, everything's done digitally. Why we don't even have these encrypted flash drives? What these systems are designed for auditors, monitors to access them remotely.
Right, right. I believe he's not. I From what I understand, FDA auditors can view files, but they're probably not allowed to download documents, even though
I
I would have
see.
Braille and whatnot, because it would put a digital stamp on there.
I see. That's good to know, just in case in the future. So that would be strange. I think if I wasn't prepared for that request, I wouldn't be able to comply even if I wanted to. Um,
I luckily had an extra flash drive in my drawer that day, so,
but encrypted and all that, how do you know? I mean,
my I had my IT, director for my department with that, right away.
wow. Wow.
Mm,
I guess it's a minor thing, but this is what we geek out about in our space. Um, okay, so that you had a war room. Who was in the war room with you guys?
um, I had, I'm gonna my regulatory manager, the coordinator manager for that group, a scribe, which is somebody from, on the team who was literally just there to take notes. We rotated that out every couple days. I thought it was a great experience for the coordinators to have an understanding of what questions came up through the audit, what learning takeaways could be, gleaned from the situation. And myself, it was just us, and we pulled in the PI when we needed to, and pulled in the sponsor when we needed to. The other thing that was also interesting is that the sponsor said, "Our TMF is locked. You may not ask us for any documents."
Wow. So much for being helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we had everything. We were able to locate like the one or two documents of 5 years of data that we didn't have. What was interesting is that the trial itself started before we had an e-reg system, so it was paper based. So that, it definitely, you can notice those things when you're in the system. So we had to let them know that we transitioned during the project into
Hmm.
an electronic system.
Were you
Um,
guys a high enroller for that study or?
yes,
Okay,
highest
I see.
worldwide.
That seems to be correlated with audits is high enrolling. So if you guys trying to avoid one,
I know.
don't be a high enroller. I've never been in a I'm not afraid of FDA audits, but why, you just said it was 2 weeks. I mean, why put yourself in that situation if you know it's gonna be like it's gonna take away resources from seeing patients or doing studies. So I've never been one to want to be a high enroller. I'm always okay being like above average, but not too much.
Yeah. It was interesting because the FDA audited 6 sites for the study.
Hmm.
We were the last.
You were the last, yeah. What is the, I guess, how does that work in the war room? Were you in there like all day? Was it like hour by hour he would walk in or just email you things or like how does that interaction work on a hour by hour basis?
Well, every morning the manager, she ran point for the project, for the whole audit. I was really there just for support. When meet the auditor outside, escort them up to the room, give them a couple minutes to kind of get their laptops and everything organized, and then meet with all of us to tell us what documents that they would be reviewing in that day, which subject numbers that they would be reviewing, and then we would pull anything that needed to get pulled for review.
I see.
So we had
So
another set up with all of our binders because those were still on paper.
I see. So it's not like an hour by hour thing. It's like in the morning and then
It was
it's
like in
at
the
the
morning
end.
for lunch, and then, at about 3 o'clock, there was a touchdown.
Okay. And when he arrived, because you were not able to prepare, so when he arrived, did he say specifically, I'm here for this study, or did he say, I'm here for this study and possibly look at other studies?
He said I was here for, study A, study B, study C, and
Okay.
identified all of those, you know.
So you knew at least what studies he was going to look at.
Yes. Well, the sponsor thought we had thought we were only going to get audited for the study that was still open to enrollment, but it, you know,
I see. So it was
open to
three.
open, like it was still active, but we were
So
indeed, audited for all three.
all three, same sponsor, same IP, I'm guessing.
Same IP, same patients.
Okay.
Went from one study to the next for two of those protocols.
Were you ever worried that, hey, okay, he said he's only here for these three studies, but in theory he could ask for anything? Like, were you staff prepared for that or?
I guess you always have to be. At the end of the audit, he did inform us that this was the longest audit he had ever conducted.
Wow.
So I'm sure he was also eager to kind of get out.
But overall was pleasant or did he have recommended, I don't know how much detail you can give, but any
Um,
big issues or?
Very pleasant. I'll give you my 2 cents takeaways from some of this because it was like a learning opportunity, I always feel. He
Mhm.
was very pleasant. I do feel like the FDA auditors have their own nuance of what they're going to look at and what they're going to focus on. This auditor looked at every single monitoring letter to make sure it matched against the monitoring log and that every single one of them was filed. I was a little shocked by that.
I see. So in a way, by doing that, he's auditing the CRO and the CRAs to make sure
Yeah.
that they're documenting properly as well.
Yes. Um, so that was interesting. Um, he was very, did about 50% source doc verification for the patients that were enrolled. Wanted to have a clear understanding, for any subjective measures that were being collected to how that information was being collected and to verify he had an understanding clinically of what was going on and that, the staff explaining that could have an understanding. Um, the other takeaway was, patient had a late visit. I don't know, they had a medical emergency where they couldn't come on site. So it was a protocol deviation, but right in there in the source document was the, notice from the sponsor that they allowed that. And, it told the story. And having the documentation is very important.
I'm gonna splice that part out for my coordinators to hear because this is exactly the case, especially when you're talking about years later. But even when you're talking like 6 months later, if you guys get busy and you start having queries and database lock, and you go back to try to answer your queries, you go back to your source and you don't understand what happened, you have to guess. It's not a good thing. You need to tell the story of every visit. Every visit has its own nuances and intricacies. So you guys were documenting properly and it made for a relatively smooth audit.
Yeah, the other takeaway is, how there are some laboratories that put clinically significant and not clinically significant in the little marking spots.
Hmm.
Not all labs came out that way. And even though that the PI had signed at the bottom, there was a notation made by the auditor that there was not a clinically significant, non clinically significant marking on that exact lab because the lines were not made by the central lab.
I
So
see.
really
And it was out
important.
of range or was it within range?
They were out of range and the line
Okay.
there, and my really, my very, very seasoned staff know to make those lines and tell, and really point the clinical staff to like sign off on that lab report in every single spot. But, this other staff person didn't do that and it got dinged. And it's very interesting that that was like the one item that was the take home message from our entire audit.
Makes sense. Labs make mistakes. Was it a central lab or a local lab?
It was central.
Central lab, so the sponsor appointed lab. So I guess that's a message for all the sites. Like, don't rely on those boxes from the central labs. And like you said, you got to pay attention. If you notice that those boxes are missing and you're a CRC, you can put the boxes in there and have your PI check yes or no.
Yeah. And we didn't need the PI as much as I thought because partially I had such a seasoned manager running point on the audit, right? They knew every single patient, knew the clinical course of the patient, could
Mm.
understand what from an SAE perspective. But if if that person was not in place, the PI would have had to be present a lot more.
So was that a deviation then that he discovered, or
The
the lab
the
thing?
the lab issue?
Hmm.
No, because there was, because the PI had signed at the bottom of the form acknowledging that they had seen that,
Mm.
you know, it was just not assessed.
So it was just like a minor issue, not a
It,
deviation.
it was a minor issue.
And one more insider baseball question. You said the auditor was doing source data verification. So how do you give him EDC access?
We did not. He had it. This was a study that was, being submitted to the FDA for approval, and he had information from what they called the center, and he had um, diary data, he had EDC data.
Hmm.
And so if he had a question, he was in his system and we would show him how to find things.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense that the sponsor would send that info to the FDA. And so that makes sense to me. Okay, switching gears. So you guys made it out okay and flying colors.
Flying colors, always a learning experience. It's my fourth FDA audit and I'm happy to move on.
Wow. And 2 weeks is a long time. Usually it's like a day or two.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it was not a for cause. It was just you're a high enroller. This was an important study. Therefore, we're going to audit.
Correct.
Mhm.
Correct.
Back to managing staff. So you were saying recently you've noticed, and this is March 2023 for those watching in the future, you've noticed a slowdown in study activity to some extent. I have not. So I'm curious to get your take on whether your situation's unique or you're just seeing things before I am.
Good question. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure what the slowdown. I don't know if it's we took on less studies 3 years ago. So the down, like we have less trials in our portfolio today because of that, because we
Mm.
had a lot of projects that closed last year. Um, is pharma contracting at all in terms of what they're doing? Good question. I've had a couple of trials get pulled in phase 3 after we've been, greenlit and SIV'd and, screening um, for funding issues. I don't have those specifics. I'm not privy to that, but that's a little worrisome. And so I always say under promise, over deliver, make the best of this, every trial that we do have.
Mm-hmm. I, I mean, managing this site, um, over the years, you've inevitably seen the roller coaster of, busy time periods, little lighter time periods. How do you delegate and manage human resources when it comes to the times where there's maybe not as much going on as you would like, and maybe you're actually a little overstaffed at those times? How do you delegate, and what do you have your staff do during those times?
So the overstaffing situation is obviously the best case scenario, in my opinion. We always have a cadre of coordinators who are interested in going to medical school, so we know that people will be leaving. So having people trained up is really, really important, and to have an overlap even is ideal because you don't want to wait 3 months before somebody is trained to delay recruitment for that time period.
Yeah.
um, I think it delays everything for those projects. In terms of human resources, um, really trying to ensure that regulatory documents are up to date, that training is up to date for those staff members, that they're filing all the things that they can. What additional recruitment processes can we put in place for programs that are having a harder time? And also, can staff support each other, like creating that network within our divisions to ensure that there's a real team approach, and trying to remember at the end of the day, there's a patient there and they don't want to be in that clinic any longer than they have to. So if we could help get them out of that clinic, by shave off 20 or 30 minutes because somebody's picking up IP, or, helping to, escort them while coordinator's seeing another patient, it's about the team.
Yeah, I guess that's it's always good to have sort of a farm system where you're developing the skill set needed for when inevitably those busy times come back, because then you've got the problem of staff burnout, right? Which is a very real thing in our industry. How do you proactively manage staff burnout?
I think, it doesn't matter how you hire these staff once they get here, it's how they are managing, and communication. If you don't know staff are burned out unless the staff are communicating that to their managers. I encourage that my managers meet with their staff on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis once they get to that point and there's a certain cadence. But having private meetings is a little bit different than the stop in the hallway, hey, how you doing?
Hmm.
Um, I feel like different things come out during a private meeting where, there could really be like, I'm struggling with my investigator, I can't track them down, or
Hmm.
I'm really, I'm working 10-hour days and I don't know how to adjust my schedule. How can you help me? Because I'm feeling some burnout. I think communicating with your manager is the first step into like taking a deep dive and a deep look to find out how that could be looked at and how it could be addressed. And I think coordinators, staff need to set boundaries, in general. It's I know I say that and it's kind of laughable because I also tend to work, many hours, especially when I'm remote, I tend to work longer hours. And it's important. There are other things outside of my work world that are priority in my life, and I want to make sure that those things, my family and all of my hobbies and the other things that make me a better leader continue to happen.
How do you ascertain uh let's say someone's you have managers, so do you ever go one-on-one with a coordinator, or do you mainly go one-on-one with the managers?
Mostly I go one-on-one with the managers. If there's a problem that needs to be addressed, or, my manager feels like they just need some extra support, I am happy to go, meet directly with the coordinators, but I do not generally like skip reporting. I
Yeah.
think that's up for bad triangulation. Um,
Yes. There's a lot of potential pitfalls with that.
yes, so
Uh,
if I meet with a coordinator, there's definitely always a manager there, as a group meeting. Um, and I people are welcome to communicate with me, like in a drop in, like, do you need something? But I don't want specific problems to be,
mm,
about the manager being involved. But I handle things from time to time, if there's a problem with, I don't know, radiology, right? Like in getting the radiologist to read the scans in the right manner, right? Like that's a process problem, right? It's an
mhm.
institutional process problem. So we have to make sure that we get the right people involved to make sure that the reading comes out for what we need for that project.
It makes sense that if you ever were to meet with a coordinator, that the manager's there, because I could see even at a smaller site how if you have that structure in place, the potential for jumping chain of command, which you worked hard to instill, is there. And with my new site, I'm just thinking for myself here, if I eventually want to get to the point where we have site directors, I'm not sure how I would handle it because on some level, you want to make sure the coordinator is comfortable enough to talk to you with the manager not there. But
Of course.
it's slippery slope. And whenever I talk to someone in your situation who is in charge of a lot more staff than I probably will ever be, I ask these kind of questions mainly for myself because I want to know how to do it when I get to that point.
I have last year I did a, a feasibility assessment of like how they're doing. I wanted to hear about what they wanted to learn about and what, they see room for improvement. And if they felt like they were being underutilized, I wanted to kind of hear. Um, I think using feedback forms and, check-ins in a way that adds an additional layer.
Mhm.
And I do think that uh, the tone of the office gets set by the staff who are there, right?
Yeah.
Like if the staff are positive and upbeat and engaging, then that's going to set the tone for the office.
So since you mainly do your one-on-ones with your managers, how do you how do you how do you decide, if let's say somebody's coming in and says, "Hey, you know what, Michelle, I'm really burnt out right now." How do you decide whether, okay, well, you might be burnt out, but this is actually what we require, not necessarily for you to be burnt out, but you're not really doing anything that we would expect you're not able to handle. Because not everyone works at the same level, not everyone's as efficient. So how do you get involved when someone says, "Hey, you know what, I'm burnt out"? How do you judge whether it's legit or whether they're just complaining?
I think there's a couple things. There's like the feels of what's going on, right? Like the assessment by the manager. There's the are you recruiting into your studies?
Mm,
Like the hard recruitment numbers, right? It's the looking at the monitoring letters and seeing what's the follow up at the, in terms
mm.
of resolution for those and like a QA process for those letters to see.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's just it's never gonna be fair as as hard as you try, or at least for me. I try to make things fair for my CRCs. We don't have managers yet. I'm the manager. So I try to make everything fair. Like even if I distribute workload, I think evenly, inevitably someone's going to get a harder study or a study that we're actually busier on because the patients are there. It's never
Correct.
fair. Like it's just really tough to be able to navigate this, even with a small staff.
Yeah, I mean, I try to use an acuity score also to like to figure out how complex is this trial, how many patients are being enrolled, how much time is taking up to do these visits. Does anybody plan for the 3 hours you're on hold with IT because some ePro diary doesn't work? No. And there's nowhere that that's getting captured and that's just lost revenue.
Hmm.
Um, but at the end of the day, people can't compare each other, unless they're working on the exact same study. And no two people should be working on the exact same trial portfolio because every trial is going to have its own nuance, its own requirements.
Yep.
The investigators are different too in terms of what they need.
Yeah.
Um, and the personalities of the staff. There are going to be some staff members who can handle more, and there are some that are just not, they're not as capable of handling that level of details despite their intelligence. This is not an intelligence issue. This is like really being able to run point on so many different moving pieces and keeping that data in line.
I see. Yeah. I mean, that brings up a good point. Intelligence. I feel like the default answer to this question is yeah, of course, more intelligence is always better. But I feel like in the work we do, there's probably a minimal level, and anything above a certain level, which most people hit if you hire them. Everything above that, it's kind of diminishing returns. Like, have you noticed as far as capabilities of staff that there's any correlation between higher intelligence and more output?
No.
Me either. Matter of fact, sometimes it works against them because they know they're smart. They know they're smarter than the average coworker, and they feel like they can get away, or there's even a sense of entitlement there. That's just interesting stuff I think about randomly.
I think, again, it goes back to know your protocol, know the ins and outs of that protocol, know the nuance of your investigator, and, you be your best you, right? Like,
Yeah.
don't compare yourself to some other study coordinator. Like, be the best staff member that you can be on that team.
What about losing staff to either competitors or, vertically losing them to a CRO or a sponsor? Uh,
Yeah,
it's an issue all of us face as site directors.
I really try to let staff understand that we have a development pathway for them, and, but it's not going to happen in 3 months, and it's not going to 6 months. And, it takes, I mean, I was a coordinator for years before I became a manager, right? To have the breadth
Hmm.
of knowledge and background and understanding for how things could get done. And I know it's different today. I know the expectations are different, but you're not going to get to be a senior coordinator without having, hitting some benchmarks of what that means. Um, do I think everybody can get there? Yes, but they have to. You have to know how to open studies. You have to know how to close studies. You have to know how to run that study so autonomously that no, like, the only questions you should be asking as a new staff member is, where is the facility location?
I mean, we can say that stuff, but it won't stop people from testing the waters.
No,
A- And, we both know that mastering your skill set at the site level is probably best, and the longer you can stay at the site level, the better it is. But those greener pastures keep calling, and the call gets stronger and louder. So it's inevitable you're going to lose certain people because they want to maybe level up their career quickly. But it could also be potential pitfalls because you may not, you may think it's better over there until you actually go there.
that, and people also, are you really looking at the whole package? People, are getting contract work and they don't realize that they have to pay out of pocket now for their healthcare expenses and for other things, right? Like,
Oops, oops.
right? Like, there's overhead at, for salaries at our institution. It's 30% on top of what you're getting paid that goes towards your benefits. And nobody's calculating that in when they're, getting their offer letters to be like, oh, it's really 30% more.
Not to
Um,
mention the taxes that most self-employed don't pay their quarterly taxes like they're supposed to. They
correct,
have the employee mentality, like at the end of the year, so no one's withholding taxes. Great. I spend it all because in Manhattan it's easy to do.
right. So if you think, and you've been at, after you've been at Mount Sinai for 3 years, you're vested, right? You're vested, and you will get an automatic match on your retirement. It's
Hmm.
like, what, you know, you got to calculate those things.
Have those things with this newer generation though, or even millennials, has that actually worked as far as retaining? Just anecdotally, I mean, you don't have to speak for the institution, but what you've seen, like, do those retention tools actually work? The traditional IRA or 401k and then um,
I
the
don't think they're.
benefits.
I don't think that they don't think of these things when they're making those decisions, right? It's only after the fact when it's like sometimes meeting with new staff, and like reminding them at the beginning, like, this is like all the great things about, being a part of an institution.
Hmm. Yeah, so many challenges, especially at the larger scale. The thing I admire about Mount Sinai is that Yes, you guys are a large hospital-based system, which historically has not been very good for the industry, as far as efficiency and, but you guys operate somehow as like a smaller site within a bigger system. It's one of the few that actually does that well, I think.
Thank you. I try. I try to be as efficient as possible. I mean, I really have sat in every single seat, from research assistant all the way up, and I understand the challenges in all of those different positions. And, at the end of the day, I just want to get the research done and want to make sure that we have the ability to give the option for care as a clinical trial to patients.
Yeah, because you're a senior director, right? So I'm assuming there's within the Mount Sinai Health System several other senior director. Are you the only one?
Oh, cancer has a big
Okay.
program. And then there are other research program directors within the institution as well.
So there's probably a handful of people like in your role within the system.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you guys ever interact like how how you guys are doing, or like are
Oh,
they autonomous? Like do they have to use Red Cap, and do they have to do what you do, or they can
there's
operate?
definitely silos in terms of how research happens, but the processes that are institutional, there's a lot of cross communication between those locations. So I'm on lots of meetings with those other folks.
I see. So you have a degree of freedom within your department, but there are certain things within the framework of the institution that you have to adhere to.
Yes.
Okay, makes sense. I mean, I think that's how why it works. I haven't, you hear complaints from people now that we have the CRC CRA Academy. They've been mature for like 5 years or more now. You hear stories from students, hey, I worked here. We've had many of our interns work for you, by the way, at CRA and CRC. And they've jumped around, right? They go to different places, and I never hear negative things about your your site, whereas with others, I'm not gonna name any names, but similar health systems that they can't say the same.
That's good to hear, but also like I'm just gonna this past week I had a new employee that came from another part of the hospital, but they were considered a vendor, right? And it
Hmm.
took almost 2 weeks to get their email dealt with. Now, it's not for lack of trying. We're a big institution with lots of bureaucracy, and if you put the right workflows in place, things will happen, but it can't be put this in today and expect for it to be dealt with tomorrow.
Hmm.
And planning, operational planning.
Does Mount Sinai operate the same as like let's say, I mean, I don't know too many New York academic medical centers, but let's say like a UCLA or UC Berkeley or UCSF, where they are huge in the sense of like creating the IP, inventing the IP, licensing out to industry. Like those universities have departments specifically for what to do when one of your scientists invents an IP, patents it, and then licensing it out. That's like a huge revenue stream for these universities. Does Mount Sinai operate in that same kind of way?
Yeah, there's a whole department for that. And I only really get involved with them for investigator initiated studies where we're writing
IITs.
the protocol, right? If we're writing the protocol, then that's when that team becomes involved.
I see. And then your staff also write like medical writers and all that on your team, or
No medical writers, I will often, we're only really starting to do some IITs and starting to flush that out in terms of program with a clinical operations team. So I have like two or three people who are like working on that team to kind of to do that. A lot of the writing comes from the physicians and then like the operations input, from myself or a research manager for whatever project it is.
hmm. Sounds like enough to keep you personally busy and engaged and always dealing with something new just because you have a wide variety of different things you're responsible for.
I have a friend who said something to me recently, and she said to always be dealing with emergencies and firefighting and strategy at the same time, that's 2 jobs.
Yeah, seriously. Not to mention nurturing employees and recruiting employees. I mean, more than two jobs. You're also like HR to some extent.
To some extent, but, that tends to wax and wane with what's going on with the pulse of the office and how things are happening and how much expansion is needed and how many projects we have, right? So,
Yeah. If somebody, I guess, call to action. First of all, everybody needs to go follow Michelle. Her LinkedIn link is underneath this video and in the show notes if you're listening. You've been really good, like for our tri-state area students, from the CRA Academy, CRC Academy. You've even hired a few. But internship, what are your thoughts on interns? And what do you look for in an intern? How should an intern not approach you? How should they approach you? Just give some advice for people watching.
I'm pleased to report that internships, are kind of back and people could be on site again and really be able to learn. I think an internship is an amazing opportunity to kind of see what the day to day looks like. I
Hmm.
have hired, I've had volunteers, who are college students who've come to volunteer in our office, and then we've hired them when they graduate. I've had volunteers that have turned into like part-time employees we've then turned into full-time employees. And we've had interns from you and from a couple other sources. I think it's great because we need to make sure that we keep the pipeline of staff in this world. I mean, it's only going to be more research, and we need to make sure we have people who are educated and trained.
It's a farm system. I like baseball, so I use baseball analogies a lot, but it's like minor leagues. When your third baseman gets injured, it's nice to be able to call down to the farm and say, hey, bring this guy up, bring him up to the big leagues. In a way, I think all sites need to do that, whether small or large. But shout out to you, Michelle. You've been open to interns, and a lot of people in your position are not. They only hire when they need to, and that's when they're stressing out about staffing. But you understand the importance of developing talent in-house. And hey, if some of them decide to leave later, that's fine. What can you do? You're not going to bat 1,000. But
Correct. I had somebody who came from CRA Academy who was in a research coordinator position, had a change of their status in terms of what they needed to do, and came and communicated what the needs were, and we were able to find another position that fits within their skill set and their scope, and are very happy in this
within the system.
within the system and within our team.
I'm gonna talk to you off air about who that is because I'm curious. I like to follow up with all our former students, but CRA in particular, we've been doing this now. CRA we've been doing since 2016, so that's 7 years now. CRC Academy is only 4 years old, but it's interesting to see, like, follow up with all the graduates and see where they're at. But big shout out to you, Michelle, for always believing in the interns or just believing in the concept. I'm sure not everyone's worked out that we've sent your way. And actually, what do you do? Like, if someone doesn't work out, what?
I think it was like literally right before COVID that we were fielding a whole like 3 interns, and it just kind of like fizzled, obviously, when
Mm,
pandemic hit. There's a process. You need to be vetted as if you were almost an employee to go through that internship process, and you need to go through all of the different steps. There's, background checks, drug testing, all you have to go through all of the
mm-hmm,
process. So,
mm.
it's like following up and making sure that, every box is checked. It's like making sure that 1572 is filled out properly.
What's the worst thing an intern can do, in your opinion?
Not follow up, not communicate. If there's a problem or a challenge or they feel like they want to learn something else, like communicate what that is. Because, not everything is glamorous in clinical research. There's the mundane, and, that could be literally, getting that lab kit to that coordinator. But that's really important, right? And understanding the why of what you're doing.
Mm, things like dry ice. Do you guys have dry ice in house, or how do you get dry ice?
We do, but sometimes it runs out, so you have to go to another place to go get
Go to
it, right?
Fry's, or where do you guys go out there to get dry ice? In Manhattan, you can find dry ice.
No, in the institution, right? So
Ah,
like,
okay.
but that could be a couple blocks away, right? And you have to like go hunt it down.
I imagine you have like ready ice or some vendor able to deliver.
Yeah, we have set delivery twice a week, but sometimes they don't deliver until in the afternoon, and you have a patient in the morning. So what do you do? And you're
I
kind of
have
like,
no idea. In
right,
Manhattan, I would be. I mean, we have the issue with let's make sure we get the labs to FedEx before 5. But we're here in Yuma, and it's really easy. FedEx is like 5-minute drive from us. Rarely busy. Back in LA, um, you would hit traffic. Like if you leave the site at 3:30, you may not get to the FedEx by 5. What do you do? Because you missed the cutoff time for when they're gonna come deliver. So what are you gonna do now? So how does that work in Manhattan?
one of the first things I did on site was speaking with senior leadership at the institution and coordinating to get a pickup in the mailroom for labs every single day. That was like one of my first operational efficiencies. I'm like,
It's
why
super
are
important.
5 coordinators calling FedEx for pickups when we could do this differently?
So just have one place, everyone in your department, you have a lab, put your labs there, make sure they're done before 3, I'm guessing, or 2 maybe.
Four, four.
4. And they gotta get to JFK before what, 7? That's not
Yeah,
easy to do. Wow.
yeah.
A lot of complexity in this industry, but thank you so much, Michelle, for coming on. Oh, any tech that you're particularly interested in that's new, maybe, that
So I just started using Smartsheet. I like to see dashboards and metrics and information that got implemented in June of this past year. And I just was in a meeting where I saw this thing called Miro. I don't, have you heard of this?
no, I haven't heard of Smartsheet or Miro.
Smartsheet is kind of like Excel on steroids, but
Hmm.
what I like is my motto for 23 is work smarter, not harder. Um,
Should be a motto for every year, but yeah.
Um, and automatic notifications, right? Like I just did a system improvement and like it's time to do like an annual, I have to do a 90-day performance appraisal on somebody. So now the system notifies me that that 90 days is up, right? Like, so
Ah,
I like automatic notifications. IRB approval comes, it sends a notification to the study coordinator, the manager, the regulatory, the finance team. Off it goes.
I see.
Um,
So
I've been really
automating tasks for yourself. Are you excited? Have you played around with ChatGPT yet?
I haven't, but my kids have, so, I kinda get to hear it from them.
It can program Excel sheets like in a few seconds. You tell it what you want it to do.
I'll
It's
have
pretty
to
amazing.
I was on a call where I guess Miro is a platform for collaboration, and people were throwing ideas out onto this website, and I just, it was the
Hmm.
first time I've ever seen tech be presented, and I was like, "What is going on here?"
Well, maybe let's stay on tech at just a few more minutes. Like, how do you guys pay patients? Is it cash, check? Uh,
Funny you mention, we're just about to go into a payment vendor system institutionally. That was the other thing I really wanted to work on. I don't like using cash. It's better for the patient, but it's really hard to track and it's really hard to verify in terms of tax purposes. So our institution didn't like that. We were previously using check requests even now we're still using check requests in terms of sending payments to patients. Not
uh,
optimal. Coordinator needs to put it in. It needs to be checked by finance, and then it gets signed by me, and then it gets signed by like 7 other people to
wow.
authorize request being written.
That's a lot of work for just like paying a patient. I mean, at my side, we just use cash and we tell our CPA at the end of the year we're not taxing any patient, just we'll pay the tax on that. We just count it as income for us. But I
Yeah.
know there's solution like Green Fire and all that stuff. We just, you know, you're right. Patients do prefer the cash, but it's not easy. It's not easy on the staff or on the institution. It might be easy on the coordinators, but it's not easy on accounting and tracking and all that stuff. And at a larger place like that, I don't think I would be using cash either.
Yeah. I had cash like long time ago, and I remember having a lockbox in my
Yeah,
desk.
I have
So,
that still to
yeah.
this day. What about things like managing your platforms? You know, every study has like 11 platforms, 12, I think the average is like 10 or 12. Links to get to this portal, link to get to that portal. Sometimes you don't even know all the portals in your study. Do you manage those?
I ask each of the coordinators for each one of the studies that they're the lead on to make a I want to call it a go book.
Okay.
It's if I don't show up to work tomorrow, can somebody else see this patient for me?
Yeah. I have they're not sponsoring, but they're a cool little tech vendor. It's free. They're called the Versa Trial, and I've interviewed the CEO. I can make an introduction, but it's free. It's a little tab in your bookmarks, and it opens up as long as you're inputting the links when you create the study. It shows you, you know, what every link is for as soon as you open a new tab. So it's all there. And then they even have a password manager um, for your staff. It's pretty cool. And it's completely free. It's something we started using last year and it's worked really well.
That's cool. What else do you have that you like to use?
We use Creo for eSource eReg. You already have that taken care of. Viva, I've been using Viva, so they do sponsor the show. But I would have used this regardless because I really think Viva's the future of tech in our industry. I mean, they're the biggest vendor in the space. They understand that sites are important. Like if we can bring the sites together under the same tech platform, it's going to make the industry more efficient in multiple ways, cost effective, operational efficiency. And they also understand that they shouldn't monetize the sites. Like it's free. So sites.viva.com, it's free e-reg for the sites. I don't have insider info, guys. I may be way off, but I understand their strategy enough to they have to know that eSource and CTMS is next. And
Mhm.
they're probably gonna do that. And if they do, they're probably gonna offer that for free. Um, so I just like to have one foot in that platform because they're just so big and they dominate on the industry side. I mean, most trial master file, most sponsors use them. So it just makes sense to me. Like they're able to afford to wait it out, and it's good to have a toe in that water. Well, I have like a whole foot in there now. But Viva,
Are are you using anything like, has your team ever used ExoStar for password management or
no, because it's I used to use Evernote personally for me. Yeah,
Mhm.
but that's not the safest thing. I mean, I'm literally just typing my passwords in this portal. Uh, Versatrial does it now for you with this password manager. So it's worked for us and it's integrated into the same system. Like it's really cool. You should get a demo with the founder or their team.
Cool. Yeah, good idea.
Good stuff. Michelle, always nice catching up. Maybe we'll do another one. We seem to be averaging one a year. Uh, oh, do you want to come to our conference? SOS, Save Our Sites Conference 2024. Have you heard about it?
Maybe. When is it?
February 2nd, 2024. It's just a 1 day thing, Tucson, Arizona. It's our first annual. We're going to eventually have multi-day conferences, but for 2024, it's our first one. We wanted to make sure we're not taking on more than we can handle. It's a 1 day event.
Yeah, let's hear more about that.
Okay, I'll send you the link so you could find more info about it, but would love to have you there because you know you're at a large system, but you operate like basically a independent site owner. We basically speak the same language, which is interesting in and of itself. So you'll meet a lot of other site directors there as well.
Great.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. Everyone go connect right now. Her LinkedIn is underneath the video and in the podcast. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Thank you, Michelle. Bye-bye.
Bye.